Hello, everyone. Wanted to go over the quiz that I gave you for the week one material. Let me just be clear that this is not really a graded quiz. You'll get full credit, the full 1 point for the weekly assignment, just from taking the quiz. But it's good to know how you did on these questions because you do want to have a grasp of what Kantianism is and how it's to be applied, and as well as utilitarianism, because you'll be employing these things in your work, especially for the first essay. But really, it's something to keep in mind, something to have for the entire class. So let's take a look at these questions. Number one, true or false? Kantianism is a form of consequentialism. That's false. It may not be entirely clear why from the excerpts I gave you that this is false. But Kantianism is not a form of consequentialism. We don't really need to go too far into Kantianism beyond what I gave you, the categorical imperatives. But for Kant, it's the intention behind an action that's important. That is, it's the will behind it, the intentions of the actor, and whether they're in accord with the categorical imperatives. That's what makes the moral difference for Kant, not the actual effects of the action, not the consequences of the actions. That's false. Kantianism is not a form of consequentialism. Utilitarianism is, but not Kantianism. Question two, the basis of the second categorical imperative is that a person has intrinsic worth. That's true. And I hope that the excerpt that I gave you and hopefully the supplement, the videos that I put out there, actually make that clear. The second version of the categorical imperative says you should always treat a person as an end in themselves and never as a mere means to one of your ends. And the basis of that is that persons are different from things. Things can be utilized because they have only relative worth. But for Kant, a person has intrinsic worth, has inherent worth, whereas things have worth only insofar as they are useful. A person has intrinsic worth that is unconditional. So the real basis, the center of the second version of the categorical imperative really is that a person has intrinsic worth, absolute worth, unconditional worth. Question three. The first version of Kant's categorical imperative says that I should always do what makes me the most happy, and that's false. The first version of Kant's categorical imperative says that whatever I do, my maxim or rule of action, should be capable of serving as a law for everyone. So that's just clearly false. Utilitarianism says that I should always do what makes me the most happy. That also is false. That is, if you read Mill's Utilitarianism, one of the misconceptions he says that people have about utilitarianism is that it might say something like this. Whereas Mill is actually committed to the idea of the greatest happiness, the greatest overall happiness. So at least classical utilitarianism, the kind that Mill is describing, the rule of action is don't do what maximizes your own individual happiness. Do that which maximizes the most overall happiness. So we have to consider all of the different interests of the people who are affected by an action and try to anticipate the effects on them as a whole. So utilitarianism is not egotistical or egoistic or selfish. It is the most overall happiness, the greatest good for the greatest number, if you want to use that motto. Question five, utilitarianism suggests that I should always do what maximizes the total amount of happiness in the world. That's true. That's what I was describing. So question five is the correct version of the basic rule of utilitarianism. Question four is the incorrect one. Question six, explain why Kant's rules are called categorical imperatives. I just want you to think about that expression. A lot of people know the expression if they have some familiarity with Kant, categorical imperative, but they're not able to parse it and to explain, what it actually means in terms of the words that are there. Imperative is an order or command. So we're talking about an order or a command. Categorical means exceptionless, unconditional. So a categorical imperative would be an order or command that is exceptionalist. That is, that must be followed in all circumstances. If you look at Kant's writing, he contrasts the categorical imperative with a hypothetical imperative. And a hypothetical imperative would be a conditional one. Like a hypothetical imperative would be eat your vegetables, your mother tells you. But there's a implied condition if you want to grow up to be big and strong. Only cross the street on a green light if you don't want to be hit by a car, right? I mean, that is the hypothetical imperative is if you want this, then you must do that. But if you don't want this, then you don't have to do that. Whereas the categorical imperative, there's no if, there's no condition. It's just do this or do that. So the idea of a categorical imperative is that, let's say, always treat a person as a means always treat a person as an end in themselves and never as a means to an end. That's just categorical. There's no if and condition to that. Always act so that your maximum of action can serve as a universal law. That's categorical. There's no if there. The idea is that these things are obvious to us as rules that are inherently rational and have authority over us. They're categorical. Question 7, explain why utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism. Well, if consequentialism is the idea that the morality of an action, whether it's a good or bad action, depends upon the consequences of the action, that is what actually comes out of it, then utilitarianism is clearly a form of consequentialism because it says that the morality of an action is determined by its effect on human happiness, which is clearly a consequence. So if we think of consequentialism as the broader idea or the broader category, utilitarianism fits into it. Now, in practice, I think that there aren't a lot of, I couldn't name you a form of consequentialism in moral theory that's not really utilitarianism, but it is a broader category in theory. Question 8, explain why the distinction between persons and things is a key aspect of Kant's second categorical imperative. Well, I've talked about this already. Persons and things, it's okay to use them. It's okay to employ them as instruments, to use them to get what we want. And so to consider them as having value only insofar as they help us to get what we want. Whereas a person is, in terms of what sort of thing they are, is for Kant of an entirely different order. So that we clearly recognize that when we are dealing with a person rather than a thing, that there are boundaries, you would say, limits to our freedom of action with regard to the person that don't exist with regard to the thing. And this is what leads to the restriction in the second categorical imperative that we do not treat a person as a means to an end, that we always have to treat them as an end to themselves. There's many different ways that this could be described, but I think that it sort of leads to the same thing, that because of the kind of thing they are, the person, as opposed to a thing, or the kind of being they are, to try to avoid confusion, and kind of being they are, that they cannot be exploited. They cannot be used as a means to an end. So that's it. I hope that it helped. Again, this is not going to be graded. If you took the quiz and you took it on time, it'll get the full 1 point that I assigned to every weekly assignment. But again, having some notion of what utilitarianism and Kantianism are important for this course. So if you have some questions about any of the answers here, or you wonder why you didn't, what was going on, please feel free to contact me and we can talk about it.